let's get started here. I don't know, if anybody pops in, that's fine. Thanks for doing this. I think we all kind of felt the shock of a good friend and colleague passing. I don't know why is this thing progressing? I knew it was serious. There was some small reports that maybe he had recovered some. I guess he had a few hours without a ventilator, and then all of a sudden he was gone. So, and we had toyed with going out to the service out there. Mark's going, by the way, from this group. I don't know if anyone else is. But I just, and actually someone provided the money for it, but it's just such a big deal to get out there, and I'm trying to not travel. So, but I think Greg was a great jewel in our fellowship. And while he had some elected positions, but he wasn't on the fellowship's payroll, and wasn't really, he hadn't been elected recently to anything, but he's been there forever. I mean, I think back, as long as I know him, as long as I've been in this role, he was on the council taking minutes, and he predates that by quite a bit. Maybe some of you have dug up dates by now. So I thought if maybe we just take a few minutes and talk from a Charis Fellowship leadership level. I just picked a small list. I could have added to it. That's always risky. To be honest with you, it's kind of nice to not have to worry about the politics of it. That's Tim's problem now. So, but I just know that we've all had experience with Greg. And what I thought is, if we could share this video with Colleen and the family and the church even, I'm sure they know all this, but a lot of their stuff is going to be, a lot of what they hear and say will be from from a personal level, and it's going to be deep. He was there 40 some odd years, something like that. And he was very much loved in the district, but I thought it would be good for us to speak nationally about a man who just worked hard for us. And I think he's the ideal pastor in the fellowship in terms of his engagement. And wasn't a big church, but he did a lot. So I thought maybe we could just talk some, maybe have some stories to tell. And we could just take maybe 20, 30 minutes and share some ways that Greg served our fellowship well. I know there's an old story about Greg from way back, where at conference they used to all wear ties to conference. Mm-hmm. And he, the lore is that he was the last holdout until finally one year they cut it off of him, and he walked around with a stubby little tie on him. He just would not give in. I think he still preaches in a suit. Well, he did. So tell me some things that how we appreciated Greg, and let's share that with Greg and with Colleen and the family and the church.
Well, I'm happy to jump in. Thanks for arranging this, Tom. What Colleen may remember is that I first intersected with Greg back in the early 80s. He was on staff at Community Grace in Warsaw and actually recruited Sue and me to be part of the youth ministry, which after he departed and a few other things occurred internally at the church, I wound up becoming the youth pastor and then associate pastor. And so while I wouldn't say he launched me into ministry, he certainly gave me the opportunities that the Lord then used to open other doors. And all that, of course, was part of our preparation before we headed to Argentina as missionaries. But more recently, as we came back from Argentina and as I became executive director of Encompass World Partners, always found Greg to be very supportive and to have what we so much value is a vision beyond the local church or even beyond the district. To him, family mattered. And that family, of course, we see that in his personal family, but also in his spiritual family, always rejoicing in the progress of the Charis Alliance, of course, which is our global family. And I remember even more specifically, as I was asked to spearhead what became known as the Identity Initiative, how much Greg was supportive of that. Behind the scenes comments to me, opportunities I had over the years to share about how that was ultimately going to revise our statement of faith. And Greg could have been defensive. No, he couldn't have been, actually, because that wasn't his personality. But he could have responded in a defensive way, I guess. But he embraced that. He embraced the historical perspective that we brought to things. He embraced the global perspective. And I thought, as I think you commented a couple of minutes ago, Tom, that in many ways is ideal for pastors. And most of our pastors are probably leading churches about the size of the church that he led for so many years. And I hope that many of them will learn from his example and be, of course, caring for the local ministry, but embracing the fact that we are part of a much bigger family, supporting that and rejoicing in that. So I have many, many fond memories of side conversations with Greg, and he always encouraged me.
Amen.
Well, to follow up a little bit on that too, Greg was a friend, and he was a faithful pastor. Ever since I knew him over the decades, he did the little things like encourage, uplift. He had the kind of personality that cared. And what really struck me a lot about Greg is his loyalty. I mean, we all know that in this day and age of wanting to be more independent, Greg was a loyal team player to the fellowship. He was loyal to his Lord, loyal to his family, and loyal to the team of the Charis Fellowship. And he proved it with his servant's heart, because I don't know how many different boards and organizations he was a part of, but even this last year, I believe he might have been on half a dozen, from Grace Schools Board to Inspire and others. And Greg just cared. And Greg would do a lot of things that are kind of thankless too. He'd be willing to serve behind the scenes. But Greg was an encourager. And Greg cared about people. And his love, I think, really shone through.
Two words that come to mind when I think of Greg, and that is humble shepherd. And 1 Peter 5 is what comes to mind. I just want to share it with all of us here, and Colleen and family. It says, be shepherds of God's flock that is under your care, watching over them, not because you must, but because you are willing, as God wants you to be, not pursuing dishonest gain, but eager to serve. That was Greg. Not lording it over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory that will never fade away. I truly believe that Greg has received the crown of glory that will never fade away. And I'm quite jealous of him right now.
Yeah, for sure.
He's no longer inhibited by the things of this world. And he was truly a humble shepherd. He shepherded the flock that God called him to for 40 years, willingly, not because he felt like he had to, but he did it wholeheartedly. I had the privilege of meeting Greg back in 1995 when I was on Operation Barnabas. And he was one of the pastors that had significant input in my life that called me into the ministry when I viewed and watched his ministry there in Goldendale as a young teenager and feeling the call on God's life to be a pastor. He was one of those people that modeled that for me in a significant way. And then in the summer of '99, I had the opportunity to come and intern at Camp Clear Lake for the summer. And Greg was my director or mentor for the summer. And I got to know him even at a deeper level of what it means to serve others with humility. And this past spring, we were out there for a focus retreat and was just spending the time with him. He was so faithful in arranging rooms and arranging everything at the camp for us at the focus retreat. and was mindful of COVID, wanted to make sure everyone had their own room, so that they were kept safe, and provided just great hospitality to all of us there. And I know he's done that for many, many years in that process. And I remember sitting with him the past focus retreat, and he was a little discouraged on how things have gone the past 2 years at his church through COVID. And I remember thinking, Greg, you have nothing to be ashamed about, and you have served well. And this is Christ's church, and Christ will continue to build his church there in Goldendale. And you've done your part, and you've been faithful to the calling he's placed on it. His life. And I know now Greg looks back and is seeing everything fully as Christ sees it. And so I'm happy for him, and I rejoice with him, and that he is able to see things from the other side. And I also grieve the loss of his presence in our lives, and just the help that he's been to us at the fellowship council level. And we'll continue to be praying for the family as they continue to grieve this big loss in their life.
Greg was on the Inspire leadership team for about 9 years. And it's been said already about what an encouragement, an encourager Greg was. And to be honest, I don't think I would be even sitting on this Zoom call today without Greg. When I was first asked about considering some type of leadership role with Inspire, it was Greg who pulled me aside, kind of like a dad would before an interview, a job interview, or a big game, and kind of breathed some confidence into my soul. And I told this story last year to his congregation. I had the opportunity to, a year ago, speak at his church at that retreat that Andrew was talking about. And I wanted them to know what an encourager that he has been in my life. After my dad had died a couple of years ago, it was a few months after that, something had happened. And it doesn't really matter what it was, but I was upset and kind of irritated. And I think I was at the point where I was done and wanted to move on with my life and leave Inspire in the past. It was that frustrating. And so I called Greg. He was the guy I called, and shared my heart with him and shared my frustration. And I can remember him saying, Mark, you're still healing. He described it as a fog. You're in a fog, and now everything that you normally would be able to just kind of blow off and brush off, it seems amplified right now, but all that's going to pass. You're fine. You'll be fine. And just in a 15-minute phone call, he was able to kind of bring me back to a place of, where my heart needed to be, because he was an encourager. And he was someone that I would consider a friend that you can call anytime. And I'm really going to miss him.
Well, I'll go next. I think we all recognize that whether it's a team or a fellowship or organization, you've got your rock stars, and they have their place, these charismatic leaders, and then you have your rocks. And some people think we can do without one or the other. I think we kind of have to have both. And Greg was definitely that rock. I remember early in my times in the fellowship, at different conferences and so forth, I'd be like, who is that guy? Is he somebody who's somebody? Because a lot of people, a lot of the rock stars, the Dave Guiles types and others, they knew this guy and were like close with this guy. And I'm like, is he like moderator? Is he like president? Is he like, what? And it wasn't until I served as executive director, I'm like, oh, I know this guy. He's a rock. And as he would take notes and as he would whisper into my ear and he would correct me gently with history, he was a reservoir, of knowledge and experience and maturity and tact. And he would, just knew that role at times, and his timing was great, encouraged me. So that's how I remember Greg. That's why when I heard of his passing, I sat stunned and like, oh no, we've lost another one of those plaster guys or Todd Scholes guys, and too soon. We've lost him too soon. I hope we were able to get from him what we got from him, what we needed from him. Another thing I want to say is, it's been mentioned that he was like the ideal pastor, faithful, 46 years at the same church, just being faithful. And I think that kind of pastor's got to come back. We need that kind of pastor back. I think we all recognize that things are very different now and for the foreseeable future for local church ministry. And who knows what's going to happen with the mega church or the multi-site church or those kind of things. Part of me thinks those days are over. And a pastor who can stick with a flock for 20, 30, 40 years is needed. That kind of training, that kind of awareness, that kind of vision's got to come back. And maybe the legacy that Greg is leaving is those of us who know him, those of us who can share what he was like and what he brings, we can spread that word around and say, hey, guys, younger guys, aspiring pastors, here's an example to follow. Definitely an example to follow.
Yeah,
Amen.
I'll jump on that. After that, I didn't get to know Greg until I was on the Fellowship Council a little over a decade ago. And it was similar to what Clancy had just shared, where Greg was always in the room, never spoke up too loudly, but it seemed like every decision the council made at the last minute, we would turn to Greg and say, Greg, can we do that? And it was like, this is a different feeling here because, he was, not only the parliamentarian and the secretary, but he knew, as Clancy said, the history of things and the backdrop of things. And not only is this the right move, is this the right way to do it, but is this the wise thing to do at this time based on our history and things like that. So I really appreciated Greg, again, an encouragement all throughout the years. This last focus retreat when we were in the Northwest, as Andrew said, Greg organized all of it. He told us a story when we first gathered there about how he was looking to continue as the director of the camp, and that some people in the churches had taken one of the little cabins and made it the Greg Howell cabin, and fixed it up nice for him because he was going to be up there regularly. And then when they passed out the cabin assignments and I went to my cabin, Greg had given me his personal cabin to stay in. And I was just, again, impressed and overwhelmed by his gentle, quiet, but strong leadership. He not only wanted to do things, but he wanted to do them in the right way, and always eager to help and to serve. So what you guys have been saying is exactly what my same experiences with him. Just a wonderful man that had a tremendous amount of influence, but it was always that quiet influence behind the scenes. And our fellowship is really gonna miss him. And I appreciate, comparing him to a plaster or to others that have had a long and significant role in our fellowship.
I'd like to share a little bit. Greg really loved the fellowship, and we saw early on just his love for the fellowship and and for being a pastor. He was my ride home to California when I was in college, and we were classmates. And this is so typically Greg. It was his car, and there were usually 4 or 5 of us in it, and the goal was to get to California as quickly as we could, which meant we took pit stops, and they were synchronized to be pit stops. So the driver, whoever was driving, had to make sure the car was gassed up while the next driver got dibs on the bathrooms, and then get back into the car and keep going. And I remember the year we made it in 52 hours was a big deal, big celebration. We did kept trimming it down and trimming it down so we were able to do that. But he just had this sense of organization, and here's how this team is gonna function. Well, then after they got married the same summer that we did, and Colleen was actually in our wedding, and after that we all lived in a trailer park, and just a few doors down from each other, and we shared everything. Times when we couldn't afford groceries, well, I had some potatoes and they had some meat or something like that, and we just spent a lot of times together. We also worked together, the four of us at the Warsaw Church, in various roles, and so they were kind of the natural people to spend a Friday evening with or whatever. But I remember when after they moved to Washington, and they would come back and they would stay at our house until they got too many kids to all fit in our house. But and I remember just the conversations about concerns for the fellowship and dreams for the fellowship. And Greg just had this heart for where the fellowship was headed, and he really wanted to do his part. And I've always respected that in him. Over the years, what we saw in him in college continued to be true, that commitment and that love for people. So this is a great loss, Colleen. I love you. And so glad that he has the hope, that we have the hope of where Greg is right now.
Amen.
My interaction with Greg's been more so over the past decade or so, serving on the Inspire board as well as Fellowship Council, especially Fellowship Council. A couple of things that came to mind have already been hinted at. I wrote down the words quiet wisdom. He provided that quiet wisdom. He wasn't one to go about sort of blasting his opinion, but when asked, he would provide it. And it was usually when he said something, it was something that you wanted to take note on. I loved just seeing his abilities. I'm in awe of his abilities when it comes to recording our stuff, meetings or whatever. He would tap away at his computer there, and there's times where he'd take a sip of coffee or head out to the restroom or something, and it's like, what in the world are these minutes going to look like? And every time we got them, there was amazing detail recorded, and I think he had the ability of just being able to remember details in an incredible way there. He was in many ways provided a safety net for our fellowship, being able to look back and see, okay, what can we do? What can't we do? What have we learned in the past? I asked him several times about, hey, thank you. I said, thank you for what you're doing. And I asked him questions about it. And he would kind of glow with the expression of, he said, I see myself as somebody who has the privilege of recording history. And he saw himself as a chronicler of our history, and we are blessed to have had that for the number of decades that Greg has been serving us in that way. Just this past conference, we announced the plans to establish a Charis Historical Society, and Greg was thrilled in the comments with me. He was thrilled about that, and he was excited about that, and I was excited to lean into his wisdom and insight, and as we got this thing off the ground. And so I'm sort of personally grieving that loss, but at the same time thankful for what he has done for us and what he has recorded and the details that he has provided there. I just want to also mention that that encouragement and the impact that he's made on the lives of many. It's already been hinted at, but there are many that could be on this call. I'm just thinking of one guy in my district here at a local church that Greg knows fairly well, and this gentleman would put Greg up in the top 3 influences in his life, just because of, and they live on opposite sides of the country, but in the few times that they're together, the wisdom and the care and the encouragement that has been provided just has changed that gentleman's ministry in a significant way. And I imagine that there are actually countless other examples throughout the years and even recently where Greg has had that kind of influence and impact. And so I'm just thankful to have known him. Mourning the loss, and thinking of the church and the family there as they grieve and go through this transition. But at the same time, I see Greg being able to see the portion of history that he's been able to be a part of, seeing how that fits into the history and the timeline from God's perspective. And I'm excited for the fact that we do one day get to be able to reunite again and be able to see him in glory with clarity about what God thinks about what we've done and how we've served him over the years.
Yeah, I've known Greg, I think 51 years now. I was in school like Vicky with him. In fact, I was his RA when I was a sophomore. He was a freshman. And, you know, when I became president, we did these regional meetings, and we had one out in Sunnyside Church, and he brought gobs of people from his church. I'll never forget, he talked to me that night. He said, Bill, I think it's been 20 years since Grace has had somebody out here in Washington State. If you ever want to get students, you got to come back. And he spoke the truth with love. And I don't believe I've missed one of the focus retreats, and I took a bunch of the pastors to a Mariners game one time, and I really listened to him, and I've had a wonderful relationship. Those focus retreats in May, it's a beautiful drive up to Mount Rainier, and as they've added the Hispanic churches, it's just been so special, so special. But you know, he was a wonderful pastor who loved his wife, his family, his congregation, but he also loved the Charis Fellowship. And when he was on a board, he didn't mess around. He really put his heart into it. He would share what was appropriate and at the right time. Story I wanted to share, Tom, it's kind of amazing. I think you know this. You were chairman of our board for a while. Dr. McLean put together those bylaws, and or the articles of incorporation, actually, and he filed it with the state of Indiana. It says you're never to change the doctrinal statement. Now, we've learned our current situation says we have to review it every 5 years, but, you know, I took this to our board, and I was so glad Greg was on the board. He figured out a way to do both. He figured out a way to honor Dr. McLean's, the way he wrote those articles of incorporation, but we still adopted the new Charis Fellowship statement. That's something that I honestly think only Greg Howell could have figured out how we should do that. He was a tremendous board member. He never missed. In fact, this last September 30th, we had board meetings. He gave devotions on the morning of September 30th. And he said to me with a little smile going, I'm going to talk about you, Bill. And I said, don't get me in trouble. And he didn't at all. He told a story when I was his RA. I went down to his room after midterms, and I said, Greg, I just want to talk to you a couple of minutes. Is this the best you can do? And he said, no, I can do better. And he said, I never had any grades in trouble again. And he thanked me for that. And I'll never forget that, Tom, on that Thursday morning, September 30th. Then I had breakfast with him on October 4th over at a local restaurant. And I shared with him some stuff that's been going on. I've been under a lot of stress. And I shared with him the details of some of that. And he said, Bill, I'm going to be praying for you. And there's no doubt in my mind, he prayed until he was with Jesus. And Colleen prayed too. They told me they were. I think he went to that hospital in Oregon the same night as my stroke. Actually, I can't believe it, October 19th. We're going to have John McIntosh, who's going to be out at the service there in Washington from the Grace Board. And I'm so sorry I can't be there, but Greg meant so very, very much to me. He was a special, special friend. He spoke the truth in love, and I listened to him. And I'm just glad I had a chance to share this a little bit tonight. So Colleen and your children, we love you all. And I just send my love here from Winona Lake tonight. Thank you very, very much.
When I started this job, he was doing the recording secretary work for the Fellowship Council. So we worked side by side through all this. You're right about his minutes. They are very verbose. I had the privilege of cutting them 10-20% or something like that, but you knew if it was said, he was listening, and that was very good. But his impact in our fellowship, of course, as we all know, goes way back. I think he rode through a lot of the late around the 90s, what I call the splinter in our fellowship. I don't know exactly when he was on the old executive committee, but I know he was very close to it. I think he was on it through some of that, and he was on the Fellowship Council through some of that. And so he wrote all that out. And I like to think, and we've had some conversations, and I think he saw it, that it, you know, that not only was it worth it, but we've come out on the other side, and I think he sees a whole new day. And I think he was rewarded by being able to see that. It just reminds me of why we hang on. I mean, it's the same thing in marriage, is the same thing in church, and all these things, because it gives God a chance to knock off our edges and make us beautiful. It's kind of like I think of the wheel you put stones in that just keeps grinding. And if, you know, and when you get done, they're beautiful. But Greg was a leader in our fellowship. I think, I would be glad to put him up as a model for anybody. And like we all know, we have our guys that just have big churches. We have our guys that have small churches. None of that really matters. It's all a matter of a stewardship of what God's given them. And Greg was very, very faithful. About a year ago, he was talking about retirement, because I was talking about retirement, and he was kind of wondering how it was going to play out, and he got the better plan. So, you know, I'm very glad for him. When I first texted Colleen, she said, I think we're going to lose. This was early on. She said, I think we're going to lose Greg, and I'm jealous. And I know that she felt that deeply. So, you know, Colleen, I know you're going to get a chance to watch this in family. Thank you so much for sharing Greg with us. He's had a deep impact. You know, we're just very, very grateful for you sharing him. And I know the district will hopefully see this too. And he's very much a part of that. I watched him ride through some difficult district times. And he was always the guy, you know, as conservative as he is, and if you know him, he is, he also was full of love. It was the perfect grace and truth match from where I sit. And you could always count on that with him. He wasn't going to abandon truth. He was going to stick up for it, but it was going to be full of love and full of grace. And that's probably, I think, in our movement, the best thing you can say about a guy, because I think that's what we value the most. So thank you all for being a part of this. I'll share this with Colleen. She doesn't know what's happening, so I'll give her a call and send her a link or something like that. And Mark, when you get out there, you can maybe reinforce that mess. I'll send, you guys will all get a link to it when we get it up there. But I think this was good to do. I put a question on the bottom of one of the emails I sent to you. So if Dave Plaster and Todd Scholes and Greg Howell are meeting, what are they saying about our family, our fellowship? There's no answer to that, but it is it's kind of fun to wonder what they see from heaven's perspective about us. But either way, I know they love us. So we've had great leaders.